I'm Veronica Dudo. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, big meeting as tensions rise at home and abroad. President Trump meets with his cabinet. We're at the White House. Borders are up north.
We are not surrendering the president's mission on immigration enforcement. That's just simply ridiculous.
Tom Homan holds his first press conference since arriving in Minneapolis. His message to the U.S.
Congress has the authority and the moral obligation to act. What's missing is Republican will to act.
7 Republicans vote with Democrats to block the 6 government funding bills. I'm Eric Rosales. Is the government shutdown on the way? I'll let you know coming up.
Plus, Birthplace renovation, the exciting things in store for the Grotto of the Nativity in Bethlehem. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the feast day of St. Sulpicius Severus. Our top story tonight, President Donald Trump makes several big headlines on everything from Ukraine to the Fed to Venezuela. He did so while holding another one of his open to the press cabinet meetings at the White House. We have some of the key highlights from the marathon-long meeting. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
Veronica, good evening to you. Let's start with Ukraine, where that terrible war continues, now nearing its 4th anniversary, Russia invading back in February of 2022. And President Trump saying today that he asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to ease up on the bombing, especially right now.
As Russia has been pounding Ukraine's critical infrastructure, leaving many around the country without heat in the dead of winter, President Donald Trump says he asked Russian President Vladimir Putin not to target the Ukrainian capital as the region experiences frigid temperatures.
I personally asked President Putin not to fire into Kiev and the various towns for a week, and he agreed to do that. And I have to tell you, it was very nice. A lot of people said, don't waste the call, you're not going to get that, and he did it, and we're very happy that they did it.
And weeks after the U.S. ousted then Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, the skies are opening up.
And I just spoke to the president of Venezuela and informed her that we're going to be opening up all commercial airspace over Venezuela. American citizens will be very shortly able to go to Venezuela, and they'll be safe there.
The President's Secretary of War discusses Iran, which faces the threat of U.S. military action in response to the killing of demonstrators and over possible mass executions. The President also demanding no nuclear weapons and insisting on a deal.
Same thing with Iran right now, ensuring that they have all the options to make a deal. They should not pursue nuclear capabilities. We will be prepared to deliver whatever this president expects of the War Department.
Hours before the cabinet meeting, President Trump posting on Truth Social, Jerome Too Late Powell again refused to cut interest rates, even though he has absolutely no reason to keep them so high. Then, as the meeting was underway, the president tells his cabinet next week,
we're going to be announcing the head of the Fed, who that will be, and it'll be a person that will, I think, do a good job.
And as negotiations continue to avert a partial government shutdown when money runs out Friday, this update.
Hopefully we won't have a shutdown. We're working on that right now. I think we're getting close. The Democrats, I don't believe, want to see it either. So we'll work in a very bipartisan way. I believe not to have a shutdown. We don't want a shutdown.
And of note tonight, after that cabinet meeting, President Trump did not take any questions from reporters, which was rather unusual because most of the time he does. And we're also learning from the Treasury Secretary regarding those Trump accounts. Well, just this week, 1 million people signed up for them. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
As Owen mentioned, the White House and Senate Democrats are working on a path forward to fund the government. The issue is funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which includes ICE, after agents were involved in a pair of fatal shootings in Minneapolis. Earlier today, the Senate blocked the 6 remaining funding bills, making a shutdown very possible. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us with where things stand.
Good evening, Veronica. 7 Republicans voted with Democrats to block the 6 government funding bills. At the beginning of the week, it looked like that they were on a glide path to pass with no problems. But the latest ICE shootings changed everything. Senate Democrats say that they need to see real ICE reforms take place.
Senate Democrats are united on a set of common sense and necessary policy goals that we need to rein in ICE and end the violence.
Democrats' demands include ending roving patrols of ICE agents. Also, ICE must coordinate with state and local law enforcement, create a uniform code of conduct for agents, and require all agents to wear body cameras and not wear masks.
We cannot and we must not vote to send a single nickel to this lawless organization of thugs while Trump's secret police are terrorizing our communities.
Senate Republicans have not rolled out making changes to the legislation. One idea: pass 5 of the 6 bills and fund DHS temporarily with a continuing resolution. But some say
ICE is doing the job only because of what the Democrats did. Biden and the Democrats completely opened the border and let all these criminals in the country.
This benefits no one, and if we do go into a shutdown, it will solely be on the Democrats' shoulders.
other Democrats want changes at DHS.
Should Kristi Noem be fired?
She should resign. She should spare the president the burden of having to tell her to go, but she's totally blown it.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune says sending the DHS bill back to the House could be disastrous. House conservatives, like members of the Freedom Caucus, have made it clear it opposes renegotiating the DHS funding bill. And Congressman Chip Roy, who's running for Attorney General in Texas, posted on X, quote, "I have my own list if DHS is opened back up, beginning with no sanctuary city funding." It's important to note that these last 6 bills fund some 95% of the government, so getting them across the finish line is pivotal. Bottom line again, a short-term shutdown is almost certain, partly because the House is in recess until Monday, and any changes to the bill by the Senate will require a revote in the House. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Mene Ukubarua is the politics editor at the Free Press. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
So this could be the second shutdown in less than a year. The last one ended when a small group of moderate Democrats broke away to strike a deal with Republicans. What is different this time, and are Democrats more unified?
Well, in the last shutdown, I think a lot of Americans were watching and scratching their heads wondering what it was all about. Because it seemed like Democrats just decided they wanted to try to frustrate the Trump administration. They did mention health care as the big issue. They wanted to try to get an extension of subsidies for Obamacare tax credits, but really it was more just about throwing sand in the gears. This time around, the Democrats do have a very big issue, and that's funding for ICE that they're trying to push. And I think that there is a lot more public attention on this issue, especially after those killings that were already mentioned of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Their idea is that we want to force the Trump administration to pull back a little bit in the way that they're using immigration and customs enforcement officers. And so they think the leverage here is that funding that they have, and so they're willing to shut down the government if they can't reach some kind of a deal of moderating the way ICE is operating in these cities.
And a lot continues to happen hour by hour. Currently, Senate Republicans and the White House are looking for a plan B to keep the government open or at least minimize the damage from a partial shutdown. What are some of their options?
Well, one option would be if they are able to strike a deal, and as you mentioned, Democrats in the Senate and the White House are talking now about altering the bill that was passed by the House to limit the use of masks by officers, to limit the areas that they're able to patrol. And if Trump gets on board with that, then it is possible that Republicans in the House would come back to the table and renegotiate that. If they're not able to do that, another way to avoid a shutdown would just be to pass a short-term extension for Department of Homeland Security funding that doesn't include ICE, and just keep operations moving for another month or so that they can keep talking about a potential deal in the future.
During today's cabinet meeting, President Trump did not ask Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to speak. What did you make of that?
Well, he knows that she is in hot water. Not only has ICE overextended itself in some of these cities and led to the tragic deaths of a couple of American citizens, but Kristi Noem has gotten out ahead of herself after these shootings and said that the victims were domestic terrorists and things like that. Trump seems to realize that that has not looked good for his administration. And so he's pulled her off of directing ICE's activities in Minneapolis. He sent in Tom Homan, his border czar, but he clearly wants to minimize her role for now and potentially might actually remove her in the future.
Well, we'll continue to watch. Mene Ukubarua, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Border Czar Tom Homan held his first news conference in Minneapolis this morning since arriving at the request of President Trump. Homan vowed to remain in Minnesota, leading immigration and customs enforcement operations there until the problem is gone. He said the administration is working on a drawdown plan to decrease the presence of federal agents in the state. The border chief added that he had a very productive meeting with Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison on Wednesday. Ellison agreed to notify ICE when local jails were releasing violent illegal aliens, a major request from federal law enforcement.
We are not surrendering the president's mission in immigration enforcement. Let's make that clear. Prioritization of criminal aliens doesn't mean that we forget about everybody else. That's just simply ridiculous. By and large, for decades, ICE and CBP have carried out their duties with integrity, professionalism, and compassion. That remains the expectation under President Trump, and I will, hold our agents and officers to that standard.
Ken Cuccinelli, the former acting deputy secretary of the Department of Homeland Security in the first Trump administration, joins me now. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you.
So border czar Tom Homan says Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison agreed to notify ICE when local jails are releasing violent illegal aliens. This was a major request from federal law enforcement. Why didn't the state cooperate from the beginning, and what impact will this now have on ICE operations there?
Well, I mean, they didn't do this from the beginning because really their political position being against immigration enforcement and for open borders. But things have escalated in Minnesota to a point where they clearly think that ratcheting down the activity in their state is worth cooperating with ICE in delivering over criminal illegal aliens. And obviously, these are the highest priority folks for immigration enforcement in the first place, because not only do you remove people here illegally, but you also target direct public safety threats, proven public safety threats, and Minnesota doesn't have to take the federal government's word for it. They've determined in Minnesota that these people are public safety threats. So it's a natural place for cooperation. It's too bad it took this kind of chaos and, frankly, pain and suffering for Minnesota to get to this point. But I think Tom Homan has done a good job in de-escalating the situation and obtaining cooperation.
Tensions remain high. There's a lot of hostile rhetoric also in Minnesota. Are you surprised with what has transpired over the past several weeks, and where do you think things stand now?
Well, given the stirring up of activists and violence well beyond mere protesting, I can't say that I'm surprised. I'm shocked, but not surprised. And by that I mean these outcomes are likely to happen, not the specific ones, but violence in general, people getting hurt, both agents and non-agents, when you stoke confrontation like this. Look, these aren't protests. Protests take place somewhere. They make statements about political matters. They don't stalk law enforcement in the middle of operations. That is literally putting yourself in harm's way. And sometimes, despite the officer's best efforts, harm happens. And it behooves everyone to avoid violence by de-escalating this situation. And part of that means cooperation from local officials in turning over criminal illegal aliens.
What message do you think Americans need to hear right now that isn't getting enough attention?
Well, I think, quite frankly, that's a great question, that this sort of law enforcement has gone on for time immemorial. In the social media space, you're seeing a lot of sort of republishing of President Obama's speeches and statements and President Clinton's speeches and statements on their aggressive stance on deporting people who are here illegally, which is all the president is doing. And he campaigned very explicitly on this. This is an elections have consequences feature of his prioritization of administration resources, and he's done a very thorough job of it. And that was what everybody knew would happen after he got elected again in 2024. So elections do have consequences. I live in Virginia. I'm seeing it in the other direction in my state politics these days. But the ability to protest still exists, to express yourself, but not to interfere with law enforcement, create danger for those agents, and impair law enforcement operations. So I really wish people would separate out the First Amendment rights with the need for actual law enforcement that's gone on by Republicans and Democrats for our whole lives.
Ken Cuccinelli, we thank you for being here tonight.
Good to be with you.
Senator Susan Collins says ICE has ended enhanced operations in her state of Maine after holding talks with Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem. After an intensified crackdown within the last week, Collins said there are currently no ongoing or planned large-scale ICE operations in the state. Senator Collins noted that usual ICE and Border Patrol work will continue. The crackdown resulted in 200 arrests of the 1,400 targets DHS says they had on their list. A federal appeals court has ruled that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem acted illegally when she ended temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Haitians and Venezuelans. The Ninth Circuit panel found Noem exceeded her authority, ruling she tried to override powers granted only to Congress. The decision upholds a lower court ruling against the administration. While Noem argued conditions in both nations have improved, the court says she lacks the power to vacate the protections. The decision, however, will not have any immediate practical effect after the U.S. Supreme Court in October allowed Noem's decision to take effect pending a final decision by the justices. Amid continued instability and political tension in Venezuela, the church remains a target of harassment. This even as it tries to be a place of encounter, supporting those struggling for truth, justice, and peace. EWTN Vatican journalist Benedict Sedegren gives us a look deeper into the church in this critical moment.
The Vatican played a mediating role to try and prevent U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. This was revealed by the Washington Post in an article describing how Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, approached Brian Birch, the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, on Christmas Eve in an effort to prevent bloodshed. They even negotiated directly with Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro for a peaceful solution, but diplomatic efforts failed. The operation ended with Maduro's capture on January 3rd. Now, amid the Venezuelans' rising hope for political prisoners' release, the church continues to call for the freedom of those who remain unjustly detained. Pedro de Mendonça, director of Comando Mundo con Venezuela, spoke with EWTN News from exile about the situation.
In recent days, we have seen archbishops and other priests of the Venezuelan church raise their voices specifically for the release of political prisoners, which was, incidentally, one of the main requests Maria Corina Machado made to the Pope during her visit.
On January 12, Pope Leo met Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado in a private audience at the Apostolic Palace. Speaking at the Heritage Foundation, Machado recalled her meeting with the Holy Father and the hope that it gave her.
I had a reassurance of the Holy Father that he knows very well what's going on in Venezuela. He knows what the Catholic Church is going through because of the persecution and pressure on our bishops and priests and nuns.
Diplomatic relations between Venezuela and the Holy See began in 1918 with the opening of the Apostolic Nunciature in Caracas. When Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999, multiple clashes broke out between his government and the church. In 2021, 8 years after Maduro assumed power, the organization Open Doors reported that churches in Venezuela are experiencing increased harassment as the humanitarian crisis worsens.
No son pocos los casos de sacerdotes.
There are many cases of priests who have been persecuted, and even some detained, for speaking and defending the truth in their homilies. In this context, the Catholic Church is for Venezuelans a primary institution of moral guidance, and we have seen how this persecution, this relentless targeting of Venezuelan priests, has led many to, like the rest of the population, exercise caution, which is why, unfortunately, many priests have chosen to remain silent, to be careful about what they say
Ser cautos a la hora de decir algo públicamente.
As the country navigates this transition, the church is present to support families of political prisoners who wait anxiously outside the prisons for their loved ones. In Rome, Benedict Cedergren for EWTN News Nightly.
We have a lot more still to come on EWTN News Nightly. No priests left. As Russian strikes continue in Ukraine, we hear what life is like for Christians on the ground. And a popular pilgrimage site receives repairs for the first time in 600 years. Welcome back. A new report warns the number of soldiers killed, injured, or missing on both sides in Russia's war in Ukraine could reach 2 million by spring. The Center for Strategic and International Studies estimates Russia has sustained the most troop deaths for any major power since World War II. This as Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine approaches its 4th anniversary on February 24th. For more, let's bring in the founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, Stephen Moore. He is joining us from Kyiv. Stephen, we're seeing more deadly Russian attacks on Ukraine. How should the U.S. and its allies interpret these continued strikes on civilian as there are continued talks to potentially broker peace talks?
Well, you know, in the Middle East right now, there's peace talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the Americans are involved as well. And during those peace talks, Putin is sending hundreds of drones into Ukraine that are killing civilians and wiping out the energy infrastructure, making it super cold. And I'm in my apartment. It's about 50 degrees right here, right now. The game you play is that when the electricity comes on, you crank your heater, trying to make your apartment hot, and then the electricity goes off, and the heat drifts out, and you don't know how long you will be without electricity or when you can start heating your apartment again. And so it's a little crazy. And if it's unclear to anybody who the barrier to peace is, then, you know, let me be really descriptive. It's Vladimir Putin who's sending hundreds of drones into Ukraine to kill civilians.
Now, you co-authored an article titled "Russian Forces Are Liquidating the Catholic Church in Occupied Ukraine." It's a very powerful phrase. What do you mean when you use the word liquidated when you're talking about what's happening on the ground?
Well, that's a Russian word. The Russians say they are liquidating the Catholic Church. Catholic leaders here in Ukraine say that there is not a single Catholic priest left in occupied Ukraine. You know, what a lot of people don't know is that Ukraine, so the western part of Ukraine, is more Catholic than most European countries. So it's a very Catholic country in the West. And there's a lot of Catholics in the East that, you know, cannot worship the way they want to because Vladimir Putin has shut down Catholic churches. And if they want to go to their church, there's a Russian soldier standing guard and keeping them out of their church.
Now, you have worked on a project. Can you tell us more what happens to some of the priests when these churches are shut down? Are they arrested? Are they deported?
Well, we've got a short film, No Priest Left, and it's part of our series. We've got a series called A Faith Under Siege. And if your viewers want to go to faithundersiege.com, then they can see No Priest Left and all the Faith Under Siege series that we've got that documents Christians just living under the worst abuses imaginable under the Russians in occupied Ukraine. And, you know, we managed to get interviews with several amazingly brave Catholic priests who stayed with their flock as long as they could until the Russians literally picked them up and deported them. You know, one priest is just amazing, man, told us of what it was like to be beaten and kicked and tortured by the Russians, and yet he prayed for the Holy Spirit to embrace him. And he said, as that happened, all the screaming just became something distant. And it was just him being hugged very close by a very powerful force. And he said he recognized where the martyrs from the first century got their strength.
Stephen Moore, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, under renovation, learn about the efforts to repair one of Christianity's most visited holy sites. more than 600 years, the place where Christ is said to have been born in Bethlehem, the Nativity Grotto, will be renovated. The announcement was recently made by the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem and the Custody of the Holy Land. An Italian firm will carry out the project, which is part of a collaborative effort to preserve the sacred site that connects believers to the roots of their faith. Officials say the renovations will ensure continuity in method, craftsmanship, and artistic sensitivity toward a site of unparalleled sacred symbolism for future generations. We thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, YouTube, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Veronica Dudo. Good night and God bless.